The desert wind howled, carrying the cruel laughter of Tier 1 operators. They thought she was a PR stunt, a fragile joke about to buckle under the punishing recoil of a .338 Lapua. But when the dust finally settled, their radios were dead, and a single female sniper had systematically eliminated every legend in the canyon. The briefing room at the High Desert Special Operations Training Facility smelled of stale coffee, CLP gun oil, and unchecked ego. It was 400 hours and the air conditioning was broken, leaving the corrugated tin room baking under the lingering heat of the Mojave. Sitting in the back row, Petty Officer First Class Jessica Caldwell meticulously cleaned the bolt of her rifle. She was the only woman in the room, the first female operator to not only survive the brutal BUD/S pipeline, but to be selected for the elite advanced sniper qualification course, a realm traditionally dominated by the most hardened men in naval special warfare. At the front of the room, Chief Thomas Burke held court. Burke was a legend, a massive man with a thick beard and a chest full of classified commendations from Fallujah to Kandahar. He was the head instructor for the war game, an integration exercise designed to pit the newest sniper candidates against a seasoned red cell made up of active DevGru operators. "Listen up, candidates." Burke growled, his voice like grinding rocks. "Tomorrow's evolution is force on force. You will be dropped into a 12-square-mile grid in the Black Canyon. Your objective is to reach the extraction point while providing overwatch. Our objective is to hunt you down, strip your tags, and prove that you don't belong in my crosshairs. You get one simulated casualty, you're out. You get spotted, you're out. If you cry, you're definitely out." A ripple of laughter echoed through the room. Several pairs of eyes darted toward the back, resting on Jessica. She didn't look up. She just kept working a patch through the bore of her weapon. Next to Burke stood Petty Officer Dean Miller, the reigning undisputed champion of the sniper cell. Miller was arrogant, handsome, and terrifyingly accurate, holding the record for the longest confirmed hit in his squadron. He leaned against the whiteboard, crossing his arms. "Any questions?" Burke asked, his eyes locking onto Jessica. "Caldwell, you sure you want to carry that heavy piece of iron out there? The desert's a big place. Lot of walking for a lightweight." The room erupted into chuckles. Jessica calmly laid her bolt on the table. She wasn't carrying the standard-issue lightweight Scar H or the newer Mark 22 advanced sniper rifle. She had pulled a relic from the armory, a battered, heavy old-school Mark 13, Mod 7, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, paired with a massive, heavy suppressor. It was a beast of a weapon, notoriously heavy to hump across miles of rugged terrain, but it possessed a specific, predictable harmonic resonance that Jessica knew intimately. "I'm fine, Chiefer," Jessica said, her voice steady and quiet, cutting through the laughter like a scalpel. "The weight keeps me grounded," Miller snorted. "Right. Well, when you gas out at mile 3, just fire a flare. I'll make sure the rescue helo brings a cold juice box." Jessica didn't react. She had spent her entire military career being underestimated. Growing up tracking elk in the freezing ridges of Montana, she learned early on that the mountain didn't care about your gender, your ego, or your reputation. It only cared about your preparation. The men in this room saw a woman invading their sacred brotherhood. Jessica just saw targets. The objective was simple in theory, but impossible in practice. The Black Canyon was a treacherous stretch of razor-sharp shale, dry wash, and unforgiving mesquite bushes. The heat shimmer created massive optical illusions, and the canyon walls caused unpredictable vortex winds. The candidates had to navigate to the high ground, establish a hide, and eliminate high-value targets, while evading Miller and his team of 6 veteran SEALs who were actively hunting them. As the candidates loaded onto the transport trucks before dawn, Miller walked past Jessica, clapping a hand on the side of the truck. "Hey, Caldwell, just a heads up. My guys aren't holding back. We're going to run you down. Don't take it personally when we pull your tag in the first hour." Jessica looked at him, her face smeared with green and brown camouflage paint, her eyes cold. "I wouldn't want you to hold back, Miller. It would ruin the lesson." Miller sneered, shaking his head as he walked away. "She's delusional," he muttered to his spotter. They laughed when she hoisted the heavy Mark 13 onto her shoulders, struggling for a brief second under the 60 pounds of gear water and ammunition. They thought they were watching a failure in motion. They had no idea they were looking at a ghost. By 1,000 hours, the Mojave sun was a relentless hammer. The temperature hovered at 104 degrees, and the rocky canyon floor radiated heat like an oven. The war game was in full swing, and it was a massacre. Within the first 3 hours, Burke and Miller's red cell had systematically dismantled the other candidates. They used drones' aggressive flanking maneuvers and their intimate knowledge of the canyon to flush the candidates out of their hides. One by one, the radios crackled with the defeat codes of seasoned men who had been outmaneuvered and killed by the veteran team. "That's 5 down," Miller's voice crackled over the secure red cell tactical frequency. He was lying on a ridge, scanning the valley through a high-powered spotting scope. "Only one left. The girl." "Don't get sloppy, Miller," Chief Burke replied over the comms from the command center. "Find her. Box her in. End this." "Copy that. Moving to grid Alpha 6. She has to make for the high ground at the Devil's Spine to get an angle on the extraction point. It's textbook." Miller was right. Standard sniper doctrine dictated that she needed elevation. It gave a wider field of view and allowed the shooter to control the engagement. Miller and his 5 men spread out in a horseshoe formation, sweeping the ridges and draws leading up to the Devil's Spine. They moved like wolves, silent and lethal, their eyes scanning for the slightest unnatural shape, the glint of a lens, the snap of a twig. But hour 4 passed. Then hour 5. Nothing. The heat was becoming dangerous. The wind began to howl through the canyon, kicking up dust devils that ruined visibility. Miller wiped sweat from his eyes, frustration bubbling in his chest. "Where the hell is she?" he muttered. "She couldn't have climbed the spine without us seeing her." Down in the command center, Burke stared at the GPS tracking monitors. The candidates were required to wear trackers for safety, but in a twist of the wargame rules, they were allowed to detach them and leave them at their initial insertion point if they wanted to risk running completely dark. Jessica's tracker was sitting completely still, exactly where she had been dropped off. She had gone rogue. Out in the canyon, Miller signaled his team to tighten the net. "She's dragging that heavy-ass Mark 13. She's probably exhausted, hunkered down in a bush somewhere. Sweep the ravines." What Miller didn't know was that Jessica hadn't gone for the high ground, while the other candidates sprinted for elevation, adhering to the rigid doctrines they had been taught. Jessica had done the opposite. She recognized that the red cell would expect textbook tactics, so she abandoned the textbook. Instead of climbing, she had buried herself. Hours before the sun came up, Jessica had low-crawled into the deepest, lowest, most miserable part of the canyon, a dried-out, snake-infested drainage culvert known as the Anvil. It offered absolutely zero tactical advantage for observation, but it was the exact choke point the red cell would have to cross to return to their extraction zone once they assumed the candidates were wiped out. She wasn't hunting the objective. She was hunting the hunters. Lying in the dirt, covered entirely by a custom-made ghillie suit, woven from local sagebrush jute and dust, Jessica controlled her breathing. Her heart rate was a steady 55 beats per minute. The heavy Mark 13 rifle was resting perfectly on her bipod, swathed in burlap. She had been motionless for 6 hours. Ants crawled over her knuckles. She didn't twitch. A scorpion scurried past her boot. She didn't blink. She peered through her scope. The heat mirage was heavy, making the distant rocks look like they were swimming in water. She checked her Kestrel weather meter. Wind from the left 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the ridge 800 yards away. It was the point man for the red cell. Following closely behind were 2 more operators. They were sweeping down from the high ground, weapons lowered, clearly frustrated, and assuming Jessica had either passed out from heat exhaustion or abandoned the mission. Jessica slowly dialed her turrets. Click, click, click. She adjusted for the wind. She adjusted for the barometric pressure. She adjusted for the spin drift of the heavy .300 Win-Mag bullet. She exhaled, letting all the air out of her lungs. The crosshairs settled perfectly on the chest plate of the red cell point man. Crack! The suppressed shot echoed like a whip snapping in the canyon. Instantly, the laser detection, miles gear on the point man's vest shrieked a high-pitched tone, signaling a fatal hit. He froze, stunned, looking down at his chest in disbelief. "Contact sniper!" Miller screamed over the radio, diving behind a boulder. "Where did that come from? Suppressive fire!" The remaining red cell operators scrambled blindly, aiming at the high ridges, assuming the shot had come from above. They opened up with blank rounds, the canyon echoing with the chaotic roar of automatic gunfire. Jessica didn't panic. She chambered another round. The beauty of the low ground was that the canyon acoustics bounced the sound of her suppressed shot off the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint her location. She tracked the second operator, who was frantically scanning the eastern ridge. He was exposed by 2 inches of shoulder and helmet. Crack! The second operator's vest shrieked. "I'm hit, I'm dead," he yelled. Panic set into the veteran SEAL team. 2 of their best men were dead in less than 30 seconds, and they hadn't even seen a flash. "Smoke pop, smoke!" Miller yelled. Thick white plumes erupted in the canyon, obscuring their position. Miller grinned grimly. He was a master of evasion. The smoke would give them cover to fall back and regroup. But Jessica had anticipated this. She knew the canyon wind better than they did. She had watched the dust devils all morning. The wind was funneling straight down the wash. The smoke wouldn't rise. It would drift perfectly to the left, blinding the SEALs, but leaving the right flank entirely exposed. She shifted her heavy rifle smoothly, tracking to the right edge of the smoke cloud. 10 seconds later, a third operator rolled out of the white fog, attempting to bound to a new piece of cover. He was moving fast, a difficult target, at 750 yards. Jessica didn't hesitate. She led him by half a mil-dot. Crack! A third vest shrieked. Silence descended on the command center. Chief Burke gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. The impossible was happening on his screens. The undisputed kings of the mountain were being picked apart by a ghost. "Miller." Burke barked into the mic. "What is your status? Talk to me." Down in the dirt, Dean Miller was pressing his face into the gravel, his heart hammering against his ribs. The arrogance had completely drained from his body, replaced by the primal terror of being hunted. 3 of his men were dead. He had 2 left, and he still had absolutely no idea where she was. The radio hissed with static. Then Miller's voice came through, trembling with a mix of rage and awe. "She's not on the mountain, Chief," Miller whispered. "She's in the dirt with us." The Black Canyon was no longer a hunting ground. It had become a tomb. Down in the suffocating heat of the anvil, Dean Miller pressed his cheek against the jagged shale, his breathing ragged. Beside him, 10 yards to his left, lay Petty Officer Cole Sullivan. Sullivan was a breacher by trade, a man who kicked down doors in Ramadi with a shotgun, but out here, pinned down by an invisible shooter, he looked entirely out of his depth. To Miller's right was Wyatt Nash, the Red Cell's secondary marksman, his eyes wide and bloodshot, scanning the shimmering horizon. "Where is she, Miller?" Nash hissed over the encrypted short-range comms, his voice cracking. "We've been scanning the ridgeline for 20 minutes. She has to have shifted. Nobody stays in one hide after dropping 3 targets." Miller gritted his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. "That's because she isn't on the ridge, Nash. She's below us. She's shooting upward using the canyon's acoustic bounce. We are looking in the wrong damn direction." "Below us. That's suicide. There's no exfil route from the wash." "She's not trying to exfil," Miller growled, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "She's trying to exterminate us." In the command center, Chief Thomas Burke paced the length of the room, the monitors usually flashing with the rapid, aggressive movements of his elite DevGru operators were stagnant. His men were paralyzed. This was a Tier 1 unit, men who had hunted high-value targets across the globe, currently being held hostage by a single female candidate lying in the dirt. "Miller, you need to break contact," Burke commanded over the radio. "You are in a fatal funnel. Fall back to Grid Charlie 2 and regroup." "Negative, Chief," Miller replied, his pride overriding his tactical sense. "If we stand up to fall back, she'll pick us off. We have to flush her." "Nash, Sullivan, listen up. On my mark, we execute a bounding overwatch toward the dry creek bed. I'll lay down suppressive fire. Sullivan, you move first. Nash, you cover his 6. We push into the brush and close the distance." "Copy," Sullivan whispered, pulling his legs under him like a coiled spring. 600 yards away, buried under a layer of crusty Mojave dirt and woven sagebrush, Jessica Caldwell didn't just hear the crunch of shifting gravel. She felt it through the earth. Her body was screaming. She had been perfectly motionless for nearly 8 hours. Lactic acid burned in her calves, and her throat felt like it was coated in crushed glass. The internal temperature of her ghillie suit was hovering around 115 degrees. But her mind was utterly detached from the physical agony. She was a machine running calculations, reading the environment. She watched the heat mirage boiling off the rocks. The wind had shifted, dropping to a steady 4 miles per hour from the east. She smoothly rolled the parallax dial on her Night Force optic, bringing the cluster of boulders where Miller's men were pinned into razor-sharp focus. She saw the barrel of Miller's M4 rifle poke around a rock. He was getting ready to shoot blindly to cover a movement. They're going to break for the creek bed, she thought. It's the only microterrain that offers defilade. Jessica shifted the heavy Mark 13 rifle a fraction of an inch to the left, pre-aiming at the exact gap between the boulders and the edge of the creek bed. She wasn't going to track a moving target. She was going to let the target run into her crosshairs. She dialed her elevation turret down, distance 580 yards. "Go!" Miller roared, opening fire. The canyon echoed with the deafening chatter of his rifle, spitting blank brass into the dirt. Sullivan exploded from behind his cover, a blur of desert camouflage, now sprinting in a low crouch toward the ditch. He was fast-moving with the explosive speed of a seasoned operator. He had 3 seconds of open ground to cover. 1, Jessica counted in her head. Sullivan hit the halfway mark, his legs pumping. 2. He reached the edge of the ditch, preparing to dive into safety. Jessica exhaled. The crosshairs floated perfectly into the empty space just ahead of Sullivan's chest. Crack! The massive point. 300 Winchester Magnum. Blank sent a concussive wave through the dust. The miles gear on Sullivan's chest and back erupted in a shrill, piercing alarm just as his boots left the ground. He landed hard in the creek bed, dead on arrival. "Sullivan is down!" Nash screamed, panic finally shattering his discipline. He had been covering Sullivan, but the invisible precision of the shot broke his nerve. Without waiting for Miller's command, Nash scrambled backward, abandoning his cover to make a desperate dash for a thicker cluster of mesquite bushes. "Nash, hold your position!" Miller screamed. It was too late. Nash was in the open, running erratically, trying to zigzag. Jessica's hands moved with fluid mechanical precision. She racked the heavy bolt back, ejecting the spent brass, and slammed a fresh round into the chamber. She didn't hesitate. She didn't overthink. She tracked Nash, keeping both eyes open to maintain her peripheral vision, watching his frantic movement. She read his cadence. Left foot, left foot, crack. Nash stumbled as his vest shrieked the death knell. He dropped to his knees, ripping his helmet off and throwing it into the dirt in sheer unbelievable frustration. "Son of a—" Nash cursed the canyon walls, swallowing his anger. Silence fell over the Mojave once more. The wind picked up, whistling softly through the scrub brush. Down in the anvil, Dean Miller was entirely alone. The undisputed champion of the red cell, the man who had laughed at the weight of her rifle, was now the last man standing. His chest heaved as he pressed himself into the dirt. 5 of his best operators were dead, and he was trapped. The sun began its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the Black Canyon, casting long, menacing shadows across the valley floor. The drop in temperature brought a dangerous shift in the atmospheric conditions. The heat mirage faded, but the canyon winds became erratic, swirling in unpredictable vortexes that made long-range ballistics a nightmare. In the command center, Chief Burke stared at the screen, his arms crossed. Nobody in the room was laughing anymore. The silence was absolute. "She broke them," a junior instructor whispered in disbelief. Burke didn't respond. He just watched the blinking dot that represented Dean Miller. Out in the dirt, Miller knew he had only one play left. He couldn't outshoot what he couldn't see, and he couldn't wait for nightfall. Once the sun went down, her heavy thermal optics would make him a glowing target. He had to draw her out. He had to bait the ghost. Miller unclipped his helmet and slowly, deliberately placed it on the muzzle of his rifle. It was the oldest trick in the sniper handbook, the dummy head. He planned to slowly raise it above the rock, drawing her fire. The moment she shot, he would pinpoint her muzzle flash or the dust signature from her heavy rifle, and he would return fire with his own scoped weapon. It was a gamble of milliseconds, a test of pure reflex. A mile away, Jessica watched the shadows lengthen. Her vision was blurring at the edges from dehydration, but her focus remained absolute. Through the scope, she watched the top of Miller's boulder. Slowly, agonizingly, the rounded top of a camouflage helmet began to rise above the stone. Jessica's finger rested on the 2-pound trigger. The crosshairs were centered perfectly on the helmet. It was an easy shot. Too easy. A Tier 1 operator doesn't peek like a frightened recruit, Jessica thought. Her eyes darted away from the helmet, scanning the deep shadows at the base of the boulder, looking for the anomaly. There, 2 feet to the right of the rock, tucked beneath a fallen mesquite log, she saw the faintest reflection of ambient light. It wasn't a lens. Miller was too smart to expose his optic to the sun. It was the polished curve of a rifle barrel, shifting ever so slightly in the shadows. He was waiting for her to shoot the helmet. Jessica smiled, a slow, cracked expression beneath her camouflage paint. She didn't aim at the helmet. She aimed at the shadow beneath the log. But there was a problem. The angle was obstructed. A thick, dead stump of ironwood stood directly between her line of sight and Miller's hiding spot. A standard 5.56 millimeter or even a 7.62 millimeter round would deflect off the dense, petrified wood, sending the shot tumbling off course. That was why she brought the heavy iron. The Mark 13 Mod 7 fired a 220-grain .300 Winchester Magnum projectile. It was a sledgehammer of a bullet designed to punch through engine blocks, brick walls, and heavy brush without deviating from its flight path. Jessica checked her windage one last time. She dialed 3 clicks of elevation. She settled the crosshairs directly onto the thickest part of the ironwood stump, trusting the math, trusting the weapon, and trusting herself. "Checkmate," she whispered. She squeezed the trigger. Crack! The rifle bucked violently against her shoulder. The massive bullet tore across the canyon, ripping through the air at 2,900 feet per second. It struck the ironwood stump with a deafening thwack, shattering the dense wood, punching straight through the obstruction, and carrying its lethal kinetic energy into the shadow behind it. Dean Miller, lying in the dirt, waiting to spring his trap, never even saw the flash. His vest shrieked, a loud, continuous, humiliating tone. Miller froze. The dummy helmet slipped off his rifle and rolled into the dust. He stared at his chest, his eyes wide in utter disbelief. He looked at the shattered stump 3 feet in front of his face. She hadn't fallen for the bait. She had calculated his exact position and shot right through his cover. He was dead. The entire red cell was dead. Miller slowly pushed himself up from the dirt. He stood to his full height in the fading light of the canyon. He reached up, pressing the transmission button on his radio. "Command! This is Red Cell Actual." Miller said, his voice hollow, completely devoid of the arrogance that had filled it that morning. "Endex. The exercise is over. Red Cell is completely neutralized." In the command center, Chief Burke pressed the intercom button. "Copy that, Miller. Confirmed. Who got you?" Miller looked out across the vast, empty expanse of the Black Canyon. He still couldn't see her. "Caldwell," Miller said softly. "She got us all." 20 minutes later, the extraction helicopters touched down on the canyon floor, kicking up massive clouds of dust. The candidates who had been eliminated hours ago sat in the back of the transport trucks, completely silent. They watched as Miller and his elite team trudged out of the brush, their heads bowed their vests, still blinking with the red lights of simulated casualties. And then, emerging from the deep wash like an apparition rising from the earth, came Petty Officer First Class Jessica Caldwell. She was covered head to toe in dust, her ghillie suit ragged and torn. She walked slowly, her muscles trembling from exhaustion, but her posture was perfectly straight. Slung over her shoulder was the heavy, battered Mark 13 sniper rifle. As she walked past the transport trucks, nobody laughed, nobody cracked a joke. The men who had mocked her that morning parted like the Red Sea, stepping aside to give her a wide berth. Chief Burke stood by the ramp of the laid helicopter. He watched her approach, his stern face unreadable. As she reached him, Jessica stopped, snapping a crisp, exhausted salute. "Candidate Caldwell reporting for Exfil Chief," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Burke slowly returned the salute. He looked at the heavy weapon on her shoulder, then looked her directly in the eye. "Go get some water." "Caldwell," Burke said quietly, a faint glimmer of absolute respect shining in his hard eyes. "You earned your spot." Jessica nodded, turning to walk up the ramp. She didn't need their applause, and she didn't need their validation. She had silenced the entire team, and in doing so, she had silenced the doubt forever. The mountain didn't care who you were, and neither did the ghost of the Black Canyon. If this incredible true-to-life story of grit, tactical brilliance, and shattered expectations kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let the mission end here. Hit that like button to show your respect for the operators who defy the odds. Share this story with anyone who loves intense military drama, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding tales from the front lines. Stay sharp, and we'll see you in the next one.